Hello and welcome to Pale Reflections, a proud member of the Duff Network where we reflect on Wildbow's most sunny work as it releases. I'm Ruben Morehouse.
And I'm Elliot Diebold.
And we are back to talk about the end of Leaving a Mark, 4.x. And wait, no, there's more chapters. We've got 4.8 as well from Lucy's perspective, and then bonus dossiers, which are Wildbow's version of SCPs, which are pretty good. So let's dive into Leaving a Mark 4.x though, which is in Snowdrops' head, which is of course the interlude that we've all been waiting for.
Yes, I was ecstatic when I started reading this and realized it was Snowdrop's perspective.
Yeah,
I imagine everyone was.
Yeah, of course. So Snowdrop has a brief interaction with somebody who is delivering papers that we later find out is Seth Belanger. And almost immediately something seems a little bit off.
Yes. But before we do talk about that, I wanted to very briefly just bring up there's a part just before this happens where Snowdrop is like reflecting on what her life used to be like before Verona came and picked her up. And I mean, this is a chapter that starts to really explore like the nature of others and what it is to be others. It's our first other interlude. And like we'll talk about that as it goes on, but there's just something to me existentially horrifying about Snowdrop being able to remember her life as just an animal.
As just an opossum. Yeah,
Like,
it's interesting, isn't it?
Just the idea that it's like, yeah, you know, I was just an animal and I drank milk from my mum and then I was catching bugs and then a cat came and picked me up and like now I'm fucking here. Like that being able to remember such a fundamental shift in yourself is that you didn't sign up for. Like that's just I don't know, there's some existential dread there like thinking about that for me.
Yeah, interesting. That wasn't as horrifying to me, but I can see why you would be horrified by it. It is bizarre to go from, not being super cognizant and sentient to then suddenly becoming it and still being able to remember your past life.
Yeah, and definitely the way some of it's phrased is she's just like, I was just leading a normal life, and now like I'm in this fucking whirlwind of adventures. Like, you know, it's almost like Avery went and picked her up in this Alice in Wonderland path, and now it kind of feels like Snowdrop is in her own inverse version of a fucking Alice in Wonderland trip. Like she was just a regular opossum, now she's been put in this fucking wacko world, and had herself changed, and yeah, I don't know. I guess, and now I understand even more why Avery was kind of concerned to hear that Snowdrop was of her, because it's like, yeah, to some extent, this is your fault.
Yeah, definitely. Responsibility
Yeah.
falls pretty squarely with the trio. Well, not Lucy, I guess. So the interesting thing about this is we're in Snowdrop's head, right? And I had this experience, and from reading other comments, I wasn't the only one, where I didn't realize until about halfway through, Snowdrop's lying. She doesn't see it as lies to herself, right? But she pretty explicitly spells it out in her head right near the start of like, even when I write things down, sometimes they don't appear how I expect them to. And she has a few lines like this that make you realize she doesn't know what lies are coming out of her mouth. And I just thought it was funny that it was a fairly universal experience of not really getting that until, more through the chapter.
Yeah, I feel like that was intentional to some degree because so much of the phrasing of conversations in this chapter feels intentionally ambiguous. It definitely felt to me like this chapter was set up so because the second time you go through it, it's very fun. Like now that you're 100% certain to be like, oh, you know, like it's like the inverse of the regular Snowdrop formula. Like to me, it was kind of like the Forest Ribbon Trail chapter all over again, where you kind of get to go through and be like, hee every time she says something because you do it like I don't know. Again, it feels like I get such simple enjoyment out of the regular Snowdrop formula, and that sort of childish enjoyment also works the other way. Where now I'm like, it's so fun to try and imagine what is coming out of her mouth from other people's perspective.
Yeah, I think it's especially fun in her interactions with Seth at the start here.
Yeah.
Because there are a few times where, I didn't realize this the first time through, and then rereading it, there are a few times where his reaction just makes me realize that her lying mouth has said something pretty hilarious. Like, she yawns and Seth says, "Oh, sorry, am I boring you?" And on the text, in the text, she says, "No, no, you're not," or whatever. But his reaction is like, like
Okay,
pretty. And I was like,
fine.
"Oh, this is good. This is great."
Yeah,
Good times.
yeah, 100%. It's very fun, and but it's also like you can see what a struggle it is for Snowdrop. She has to be so careful about what she says. She's constantly trying to put things in questions because they don't get inverted. But like, there's that one moment with Seth, where I think she just sits there and she sort of like just stands there and smiles at him because she's like, I have no idea what he heard, and people act very unpredictably. So like, all I can do is just really hope that he gets the good vibes. And based on what happens with
Mm,
her hands at the end, for all we know, like, her sitting there smiling, she's like frowning at him.
mm.
I can't remember exactly where her facial expressions land, but
Yeah, yeah. There's another moment later on. I mean, I guess I didn't realize until this chapter just how much this invades her communication. Like, she can't write stuff down, right?
yeah,
Which was new to me. But even she goes to give a thumbs up later in the
it's
chapter
so
and gives the
good.
middle finger instead, which is a classic moment. And it's just like, oh man, it would be so annoying to be Snowdrop.
Yeah, yeah, and I wonder if there's some like analogy here for being someone who doesn't speak a native language in a place,
Mm,
her being like in English as a second language, or not a fluent speaker type analogy here, where she's just miscommunicating with people, and through sort of no one's fault. It's just like she just is misspeaking, I suppose.
mm, yeah, yeah, exactly. Poor Snowdrop.
Yeah. Um, so there's this other bit here where I wanted to pull out one line Seth mentions where he says, "Before construction in the backfield even begins, we'll be using some binding circles to keep pests out: bugs, mice, wisps, echoes, lesser goblins, and the like." And seeing things like echoes and like low tier cherry pop goblins mixed in with like bugs and mice, it sort of made me realize something that I feel like we probably should have drawn a link to before, but like, we obviously know that the Blue Heron Institute looks down on others, but I think you could almost view the way they treat them as a metaphor for like how we treat animals in a lot of ways.
Mm,
Like the way Zed was treating Nina reminded me of how like somebody might treat a horse they have or something, where they see it as like, oh, it's my pet or whatever. But like, when you own a horse, you there's
well, Elliot, can you ever really own a
yeah,
horse?
I mean, exactly. Like, um, like
um,
Like, I this
yeah.
this is a weird anecdote, but, like, I went to, like, a reptile park here in Australia, like, years ago, and they're talking about how they make the anti-venom for some of the snakes here, and basically, the way they do it is they, get the snakes to bite the horses, and they sort of regulate how much of the venom is going into the horses, and the horses build up
Mm,
the antibodies, and then they basically, like, take the blood from the horses and get the antibodies, and that's what the
mm,
anti-venom is.
mm,
But the people like, "Oh, don't worry, it's, like, very humane," because they also like, I can't remember exactly what it was, but they give them drugs or something, like, the horses as they take in their blood as well. So it gets to the point where, like, they're like, "The horses really want us to take their blood." And it's like, "Yeah, because you got them fucking hooked on drugs. Like, what are you talking about?" And, like, that just made me think of, like, Zed's whole thing with Nina with the whole, like, "Oh, she wants to be in the library." And it's sort of like, "Yeah, but,
mm,
you kind of helped craft her or whatever in this way where she doesn't really have a choice, right? Like it's like, oh, she wants to do it. It's like, yeah, but you've manipulated it so that she does.
mm.
Like, not to say Nina is like a horse already, because like that's the exact reductive thinking that I'm trying to criticize, but like I'm saying that's the same, like they're treating them that same way.
Yeah, yeah, I get that. It's definitely, yeah, it's definitely just like not even being treated as though you're a sentient creature, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like yeah, just even like I could even see some of these people who deal with like gods or whatever. Like, there's probably people who think of them like lion tamers or something, right? It's like, oh, they
Yeah.
just deal with the scary animals. So like, I don't think that's like all there is to these sorts of metaphors, but like I definitely feel like there are some similarities between the way practitioners in this school treat others and the way we can treat animals.
Mm, yeah. Um, What's interesting to me, and I wrote this in the notes a little bit later, but we might as well bring it out now, is this is our first interlude from the perspective of an other, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's so interesting because, sure, all the other interludes are pretty dangerous, but this one is just so consistently going from danger to danger and constantly like basically the tension in this is Snowdrop doesn't realize that anytime she gets to what might be a safe harbor, it's just another potentially more dangerous, false ally, right?
Yeah.
And it really made me realize, and sure, in this case, maybe a bit of it is Snowdrop's own fault, but you can imagine that this is what it must be like for, let's say Matthew or John,
Yeah.
right? Where anytime you go and you're around literally any other creature, a practitioner or other or anything, you're in danger, right? And there's just no safety for you. And that just must be so draining.
Yeah, because they don't like. I mean, the only reason the Blue Heron Institute isn't like that for the practitioners is because they have this big agreement not to hurt each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and the only time we've seen that with others is Kennet.
Yeah.
So like this is sort of a bit what it's like without somewhere like Kennet for the others.
Yeah, I think
Um,
that's very interesting. We finally get to feel what that's like.
Yeah, exactly, and it's like I mean, it's rough for Snowdrop. She's just going from bad situation to bad situation until she finally kind of has to trust Nicolette, and it ends up working out for her. But like in another world, maybe it wouldn't.
Mm,
I mean, there's also this bit like to sort of tie into both of our recent points. Like Seth assumes that Avery is Snowdrop's master, um, and
mm,
Snowdrop kind of has to sit there and stew on this. And I just hate this because like there's nothing bad between Snowdrop and Avery. They actually get on
yeah,
great.
yeah,
And it's like other people, external parties, poisoning this relationship to between them by like saying dumb, bigoted crap. And it's just like
mm,
I just hate it. And I'm worried Avery's going to say something that sounds worse than it is or something, but like, this chip on the shoulder now exists and Snowdrop will get like really hurt by it. Um,
mm,
and it's just like it just sucks that it's like these two have a good thing going, but because it's an abnormal relationship, other people making comments that just are hurting both of them about it. Because we saw the same thing with or not the same thing, but a similar-ish thing with Avery last chapter.
mm. Yeah, and there's more of it later on, or what I think is more of it later on. It's a little bit unclear, but yeah, I wonder whether finding out more about how this relationship works in terms of exchange of like personality aspects and stuff is going to sour the relationship between Avery and Snowdrop a little bit. I mean, I
Yeah,
hope not, but we have got one or two beats like that.
yeah. I'm worried some seeds are being planted in that regard, but
Mm,
we'll see.
mm. So yeah, Snowdrop goes to try and order some strawberry milk before realizing that she can't just write down her order, and that's not going to work. So she decides to confront the staff face to face.
And so obviously, like, we've talked about how kind of horrifying this is for
Mm,
Snowdrop, like how there's no safe harbor in this chapter, but like it's a very fun chapter
mm,
uh as well. Like a lot of the events in this, it reminded me of that episode of The Last Airbender where they all are in like Ba Sing Se, and then there's the one with Momo,
mm.
and Momo runs around and just kind of keeps getting caught up in bullshit for no
He
reason,
has adventures with these little
like cat
like
things.
cat pumas. Yeah.
Yeah. This had very similar energy to me, and there's probably tons of other examples. Like I'm just calling out that one because it's freshest in my mind. But like
Mm,
to dip into my earlier metaphor in maybe not a good way, it's like she's got that it's that chaotic like animal companion episode energy. Like
mm,
yeah, I don't. It's just very fun. Like just the way like as horrifying as it is on one level, it's very fun to follow Snowdrop through these wacky adventures over fucking like strawberry milk. Like it's horrifying, but like just watching her having to battle brownies to the death and then like escape the library while Nina wants to make her tea is also very fun.
it is, isn't it? Yeah, this is such a tense and chaotic chapter. And I guess that's just the vibe of Snowdrop, making everything around her
Yeah. What's
tense and chaotic.
I think a line that sums it up really well is there's this one where when she first starts like fighting a brownie, the narration goes, it fought like its life was on the line. Snowdrop thought like her strawberry milk was on the line, which just sort of captures just the fun side of the chaos of this chapter. Like I think the narration does a really good job. There's like tons of things like where she thinks about fairy-ish versus fairy-esque, and then later describes the stuff brownies are wearing as gauze-esque. Like I think the narration does a lot to really set just like a fun, whimsical, insane adventure tone. And it's only really when you take a step back do you realize how kind of horrifying it is.
Well, I don't know. As soon as Snowdrop says, "Oh yeah, I'm just going to interact with one of the brownies face to face," I was kind of like, "Oh fuck, okay, yeah, fuck, this is going to be like that kind of chapter, huh?" Yeah, it's wild because it's just, she says she's going to order from the brownies face to face, and I'm like, okay, that's obviously going to be bad.
Yeah,
and then she does it, and it just goes so much worse than you think it was going to, because not only does she try and talk to one, she like catches it and attacks it and beats the shit out of it, and then just kind of runs away. Like, not even being like, now this is what I want. She just kind of runs off and yells back after her, "Well, you've got my order," and then leaves. And that's basically it.
Yeah. But like, I don't know. The fact that all of this is over strawberry milk to me was just hilarious. And again, it's like then when you take that step back, you realize what this is actually saying about what it's like to be an other. But there's definitely a fun angle to the first time you read this, like getting into a fist fight with a brownie that travels through trapdoors in the fucking thing because you want strawberry milk is just a hilarious situation.
Yeah, it's pretty good. So yeah, obviously, Wildbow's not content with us just knowing that things are about to go even worse with these brownies, and he has to make this chapter even more horrifying by having Snowdrop see a bunch of texts from VD, who seems like he has had some kind of serious medical condition complications and is now in the hospital begging Verona to come back home.
Oh, fucking, of course. Like, this is, of course, it had to be something like actually wrong with him. Like, it's not him doing something stupid.
No, yeah.
It's not Verona doing something
I mean, it
stupid.
still could be him just manipulating, but it seems unlikely.
Yeah, I'd be very surprised if that was the case. I read this as genuine because to me that's worse. And that for Wildbow stories, that's my metric of which one it is which one is worse.
Which would be worse to experience.
And like the idea that there's just a genuine problem that does actually probably maybe warrant her attention now is just the worst one, because it's not like I can just be like, oh, fuck her dad, or oh, Verona, what are you doing? It's just now I have to sit here and be like, oh shit, I think she actually maybe has to, but also I don't want her to. Like, yeah. I hate this, but I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so wild, right? Like, the group has been off having fun at Magic Camp, but they've been completely avoiding their problems. And obviously those problems aren't just going to go away. So of course this is going to rear its head and kind of put a huge damper on the excitement that they're having.
Yeah, in retrospect, it was way too optimistic of us and them to assume that we might
that everything would just be fine now.
Yeah, I was
we've gone off to school.
Yeah, I was picturing like, oh, we'll come back from the summer and Verona's dad will be like really angry and there'll be problems. And it's like, of course, it's not going to wait that long. Like, what the fuck was I thinking? Yeah, like, yeah. I hate this because of the feelings it's made me, but also like just as a plot device, this is fantastic. I can't wait to see where this goes. It's awful.
Yeah, it's pretty rough. When I initially read this chapter, I had the thought of like, we know Verona's been avoiding her phone. Has she seen some of these texts and is avoiding confronting it? We find out next chapter that that's most likely not the case. I mean, she seems like she has just found out about this now. But man, yeah, it just feels like it could go so wrong.
Yeah, I can't wait. So there's this other bit as well that Snowdrop thinks about some of the perks and whatever the opposite word of perk is about being lost is, and she sort of, Miss was apparently, telling her things, or she was getting tips and tricks from Miss about how to hold on to stuff. And Snowdrop has this one thing where she says if Miss didn't come back, then maybe Snowdrop would take over the same position Miss had, which I was just like, I mean, what's your read on that?
I think that's a pretty unlikely, I guess. I mean, like, maybe there's some aspect of being a bridge between the others in Kennet that Snowdrop could fill. She's already obviously pretty ingrained with the goblins, and maybe that wouldn't work for her kind of connecting to the Fae. But I could see her being acting pretty well as a kind of go between for the others. I don't think she has it in her to be in a leadership capacity, though.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Like she's quite bright. Like one of the big takeaways I took from this chapter, she's actually very clever.
Mm,
She's just having to overcome a lot because of like her communication issues, and also she is in many ways just like a kid. Um,
mm,
so maybe this will be different as she like grows up and matures, but she doesn't have that same sort of Machiavellian insight ability to pull strings that it kind of felt like Miss had. Like Miss just had
mm.
this intuition about how things were going to go, and Snowdrop doesn't quite feel like she has that. But like it's interesting to consider her as the other Lost, like what in what ways she maybe can actually replace Miss. Like she doesn't have to do all of it, maybe.
Yeah, yeah, I could see her taking over some aspects, but I don't think it's she's not going to become the new Miss.
No, I've still got my hopes up that Miss might come back one day for like the epilogue or something.
Yeah, I mean, do you think Snowdrop's just saying that because she's kind of a from the paths and Miss was too, and that's like a link in her mind, or
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I assume so, but it just got me thinking, like, what that could look like.
mm.
Like, I mean, look, you could do a lot worse than Snowdrop as supreme leader of Kennet.
You definitely could do worse than that for sure. I'm just trying to imagine it now, and it's just a shit show. Like, I don't see that. I don't see that being something that anybody in town, with the exception of Cherry Pop, would ever go for.
She'd definitely have to have an ambassador if she was like the head of the town, because she couldn't, like, without a briefing, people wouldn't be able to have like a conversation with her.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. And anywho, I
Sorry.
mean, I guess maybe she's making enough of a name for herself here at the Blue Heron Institute that
Yeah.
people kind of get to know how she operates.
Mm. I mean,
Uh,
I do just find this whole thing fascinating about how like she's like she struggles to see in sunlight, but she's very good at seeing things that are kind of hidden. Like as a lost, she has this instinct for things that are out of view. Like it's like it's sort of that thing. Like Miss said, Avery was the first one she picked, right? Like this is Avery was in the corner, like hiding, and that's
mm,
presumably why she came to the attention of Miss. Like
mm.
there's like Snowdrop does have some of those cool abilities, and I wonder like as she grows up and learns to use those, maybe that's like very powerful.
Yeah, true. We'll have to see, I guess. Anyway, so Snowdrop goes to find Avery or the whole trio to fill them in on this phone conversation she's just found, but instead finds a mob of brownies armed with kitchen implements, all ready to exact vengeance. She puts up a pretty good fight here.
Yeah, yeah, she's actually surprisingly good at fighting.
Mm.
Uh, the other thing, so the brownies just seem to be able to come out of every fucking surface in this school,
Yes.
right? So
Yeah.
I'm curious, do you reckon these are magically appearing trapdoors, or is this school just like littered with secret passageways? Like I can't decide which
Mm.
one I think is cooler.
Mm. I think they kind of create them. I feel like they have this effect of like they can come out of wherever you're not looking. Any kind of dark crevice or whatever, they can just kind of get out, come out of, and go into, and it all kind of acts the same to them.
Yeah, maybe maybe like these doors are manifestations of like portals between here and the brownie realm or whatever.
Yeah, it seems quite strange. They've just hidden trapdoors under like cobblestones and stuff. But I mean, I guess it's possible.
I just love the idea that there's fucking a thousand secret passageways in this school. I think that's
Mm.
hilarious. Like like you could open up a hole in the floor because isn't doesn't the brownie doesn't she chase it into a hole in the floor that's full of like cutlery? Like that's where she gets the butter knife from.
Mm.
So it's like
Yeah.
just the idea that if the trio ever do need cutlery, they could just go to the corner of the room, lift up a stone, and grab a
Grab
blade.
some cutlery. Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah.
Anyway,
So they get into this fight, right? And I mean, Snowdrop does very well, but it's weird.
she
She's
fights
kind of
dirty.
functioning, yes, right? And through her chain of thought, she's like functioning as a goblin, basically. She definitely has this vibe of like, um, She thinks like a goblin. She fights like a goblin. She's kind of turned into a pseudo goblin, which is pretty
Yeah.
hilarious, I thought.
Doesn't Nicolette specifically use the phrasing, I can't remember how it starts, but it's like with like a tint of goblin around the edges, to
Yeah,
refer to her either this chapter or the next.
yeah. Which I think is a good description of her because she definitely is goblin esque.
I think it's fun though because she kind of puts this weirdly wholesome twist on being a goblin. Like maybe not
Mm.
so much in this fight where she's going for the dangly bits, I think is how she phrases it. But like, she's always like, "Oh, I need to stick it to the fairy for my, to impress my goblin buddies back in Kennet." And
Mm.
like when someone's mean to her, she's trying to think of her most creative swears like Cherry Pop would do. And she kind of comes up with wet noodle, which is such a shit insult. Like um I love how she's like she's sort of got this bit of goblin in her, but she's still so wholesome overall. Uh yeah.
My favorite of these goblin-y bits, and I don't remember exactly when it is, but when she's thinking about how she's named after a flower and how uh, Toad Swallow has talked about how like flowers are basically plant genitalia,
Yeah, yeah.
and they're kind of talking about that stuff. Like, oh my god, she's basically turned into a goblin, and it's hilarious.
My favorite part, I remember exactly where that is because that paragraph starts with her thinking milk is the best because milk is the ultimate giving food. Like you're not taking from an
Mm,
animal with meat
like meat,
or
yeah.
stealing from a tree when you take fruit. It's somebody is giving you the milk, and she somehow transitions from that to yeah, like in a way, I'm kind of named after genitalia, and I was like, what the fuck? Like how, this train of thought is crazy.
I mean, that's just what happens when you hang out with goblins, right?
Yeah. I wonder if this will mean anything. Like, I wonder if her, seemingly getting a bit of goblin energy from hanging out with them. Like, I wonder what that means.
Mm,
Like,
yeah,
yeah, I wonder if that'll go somewhere or be significant in some way later on.
yeah. We'll have to see. So she's scrapping with the brownies, and then their fight gets interrupted by Seth, who comes in, of course, causing them to hide because they can't be seen by anybody. And to preserve her sanctuary, Snowdrop follows Seth into the bathroom.
I mean, at least it's making him uncomfortable.
Yeah. Um, no, it's good because Seth is obviously the worst. Like
He's-
God,
His
fuck.
comment about how because she's like, "Oh,
Maybe
can I
if she
come
was
in? Yeah,
16,
can I come into
yeah.
the bathroom?" He's like, "Maybe if you were 16." I was like,
Jesus
"Oh my
fuck.
Jesus!"
That's
Like,
so fucked
yeah.
up.
Also, yeah. Um,
Yeah. And he doesn't wash his hands, which is just as bad of a crime.
I did like that little note. I was gonna bring up the jab. Like he quickly is sort of like, oh, I don't want to upset the clients. I mean students, and like you can just hear him chuckling to himself at his witty barb in front of the other. But yeah,
Mm.
he goes out of his way to just really make it clear that he's a piece of shit in this short appearance in this chapter.
Yep. What a piece of shit. Okay, I hinted at this thing as well before where we were talking about the relationship between Avery and Snowdrop and how it's being kind of infected by their connection to each other, or their personalities are being infected by their connection to each other, I guess. Um, and Snowdrop, there's a scene where she's about to start running from the brownies, and she thinks she knew the fundamentals of running from the Avery download, which presumably is Snowdrop acknowledging that she has major parts of Avery inside of her, which we didn't know that she knew about, but Avery just learned about it, so maybe Snowdrop also has implicitly learned about it.
Yeah, I maybe get the impression that Snowdrop has sort of always known that, and I think we've talked about it about since it happened. I feel like Avery's the only person who's just learning about this.
Mm,
But yeah, I mean, it's so interesting to view Snowdrop as this being that's like part opossum, part forest ribbon trail, part Avery, and like where
mm,
the balances lie between these things, and now maybe with a tinge of goblin mixed in as a fourth aspect. Like, yeah, I'm so fascinated like where Snowdrop's going to go as something that's representing like a mixture of all these various aspects of the world.
mm, yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I guess that's what we're kind of diving into is the link between Snowdrop and Avery and the, to borrow a term from a different Wildbow story, the personality bleed between them. Is it just one? I guess that's a another question. It's just one way, right? Like Avery's not becoming more and more like an opossum, is she?
I don't know enough about opossums to say no for sure, but I haven't picked up on anything that's hinting that. But
Mm,
like, I mean, it's definitely a possibility. Maybe maybe
mm,
we are just missing it. I have to read up on opossums more and keep an eye out. But yeah, I mean, like you're right. I feel like this is sort of what this chapter in particular is starting to talk about. Like, Snowdrop is other, but being other is because she's part of a human, a person like Avery. And we sort of talked about how like people are okay to just focus on the animal part, like oh, treat others a bit like animals, like she's an
mm,
opossum, but there's a decent chunk of human sentience in there as well, and like I think that's
mm,
probably more important.
mm, yeah. Yeah, true. I mean, the fact that she is confirmed in universe to have some humanity in her, you'd think makes it an easier bridge for the practitioners to cross to just like treat her like a human being. But I don't know.
I mean, look at human beings' track records of treating other human beings like human beings.
Yeah, true,
uh,
true.
Yeah, and I mean, this is the thing, right? Like, I think we've talked about this, but like, as far as I'm aware, almost every other we've met, or at this point, I'll just say every other we've met has to some degree come from humans.
Yeah,
Like I think we've
yeah.
talked about the Kennet ones to death. The fairy are the only one we're maybe a little bit unsure about, but like, we even see things like John and like the librarian animus, I think was said to be similar to John. Like every other we're meeting are
Mm,
of humanity to some degree. So it's
yes.
sort of what we're talking about here with Snowdrop kind of applies to every other.
Mm, yeah, it does. Yeah, true. I mean, I, you know what, Elliot? I'm just gonna. Maybe this is controversial, but I'm just gonna say it. I think they should treat others better in this world. You know what I mean?
Oh, hold on, give me.
Well,
We have to think about
step
this.
back. Yeah, exactly. All right. So Snowdrop runs away from the brownies and kind of barrels full
And
tilt
Seth.
into. Yeah, runs from the frying pan into a different fire. The librarian animus.
Yeah, I love how Nina. Like, this is a side note because it happens in multiple chapters, but I just love how
Yeah.
Nina is always shushing people because this is a goddamn library. Um,
Yeah,
like,
that's her style.
yeah, I just wonder if she has some like ultimate aggro. Like, if you don't shut up in the library, what does she do?
Yeah.
Like,
What does she turn
does she have
into?
some sort of bookworm form or something?
Yeah, no, I bet she. What's a bookworm like? Some kind of big, giant, fleshy worm?
Yeah,
Is that what you mean?
I don't know. Like, I was just
Interesting.
trying to think of something horrifying.
A big, fleshy worm. That is horrifying. I wonder if that kind of thing exists in this world. Anyway, so I hadn't even when Snowdrop first runs into Nina, I hadn't even put it together that like, oh wait, Nina's obviously not going to be thrilled with Snowdrop because Snowdrop is the book burner. But Snowdrop kind of starts to realize this, and almost immediately it's like, oh shit, this is not a safe haven, and that's like the theme of this chapter, right? Oh shit,
Yeah.
we're actually not in a safe haven right now.
Yeah, I agree. I didn't put that together until Snowdrop did either. So like Nina mentions the book burning or whatever, and then Snowdrop's like, "Oh shit!" And then it was like a second later, I was like,
Mm,
"Right, shit."
yeah.
Okay.
Uh oh. Yep.
I mean, the interesting thing is like Nina doesn't. There's no outward aggression from Nina. Like either she doesn't know, or well, actually, I kind of has to assume she doesn't know. I don't know if she'd forgive her, but yeah. Again, you're right. It's that thing of like they're just due to circumstances. There's a reason that Snowdrop can't feel safe. I feel like her tea isn't going to get poisoned by Nina.
Yeah. Do you think that Nina was actually, coming after Snowdrop here? It's a bit ambiguous.
I
She
don't think
seems so nice.
I don't think she was coming after Snowdrop. Like I don't get the impression this was all part of some ploy or scheme.
Yeah.
But that said, the other half of that is then I have to believe that she doesn't know Snowdrop's the one who did it. Um,
Mm.
Although I thought she maybe overheard. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe she does. She definitely. I don't think there's anything to actually imply that she was going to go after Snowdrop. It's just Snowdrop has reason to think she would, and that's just enough for her to not feel safe there.
Mm. Yeah, fair enough. You just kind of, I mean, this is what we're talking about as another. You just kind of have to constantly be worried and kind of minimize the damaging situations that you put yourself into. Potentially damaging, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah. There are a few bits here where it seems like Nina understands what Snowdrop is saying. Like this
Yes.
was actually the point when I was reading the chapter the first time where I started to doubt that I was right, that things were being flipped outside
Mm.
Snowdrop's perspective. But like, because I think it's a bit where she's like, "Oh, do you want tea?" And Snowdrop says yes, and then Nina says some stuff, and then she's like, "Oh, just promise you won't spill any."
Yeah.
Um, and so it's like, okay, so she's going to give her the tea, and there's a bit later on, Snowdrop's talking to some weird other who's like a big hairy thing. I can't remember much more about what it looked like, but
Mm.
outside, and she seems to have no trouble communicating with it either. So there's almost this weird thing being set up where it's like she's actually fine to communicate with a bunch of the others from the looks of it. Like,
Mm.
I wonder if the brownies actually could understand her and see the right thing. And
And just wanted the opportunity to make some bonky donks.
yeah, oh, that's a good point. They definitely don't, and we've definitely like the goblins don't. The goblins
Yes.
hear what
I
we
mean,
hear.
Cherry Pop at
Yeah,
least
exactly.
definitely doesn't.
So I'm not sure exactly like what the rule might be about whatever it is, but like I don't it it fits into the metaphor for me that some others would just sort of be able to understand Snowdrop as she intends.
Mm.
Especially if you sort of try to link it to some sort of metaphor for speaking a foreign language.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, interesting. I think that works. So, of course, Snowdrop runs from this one potentially dangerous situation and goes to another, which is she runs away and immediately runs into Nicolette, who then offers to help.
I really loved this moment of like somebody comes to sort of help her against this other thing, and she's like, "Yes." Oh God, no, that's Nicolette. Like
Yeah.
the way that text is delivered is phenomenal. Um,
Yeah, when she recognizes the voice, and you're like, "Oh, thank God, it's Avery," and then it's not Avery.
yeah, yeah, the delivery of the dread overcoming her as she rises to Nicolette is great. And I mean, yeah, it ends up being fine because, like, especially after these two chapters, I'm ready to declare Nicolette best friend.
Mm.
But obviously, as we know, Snowdrop is not in a position to trust Nicolette right now. Well, at
Hmm.
this stage,
I think that's fair enough.
very valid reasons for not completely trusting Nicolette.
Yeah, I'm a bit worried. I'm a bit worried about Nicolette. We'll get to this a bit later, I guess. I don't know what to think about her, but anyway,
I've 100% bought in. I'm ready to have the rug pulled out from under me if it turns out she's still a baddie because I've 100% added her to my like goodies
to
list.
my goodies list, yeah, exactly. The fact that Zed vouches for her is like very
Yeah. Well, I've done the
clearly
same
a
thing with
very
Zed.
good. Yeah,
Zed and Bree have both gone like top spots on the goodie list, which is just like
yeah,
there's actually I think a number of reasons to maybe be concerned that Zed's not 100% on the up and up.
yeah.
But I've been ignoring those, and I'm doing the same with whatever signs there are about Nicolette too.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Nicolette genuinely is quite helpful here. She helps broker a peace treaty between Snowdrop and the Brownies.
Hmm. And I mean, she basically has to force Snowdrop into trusting her, but like she does, and it works. So it seems like a good thing. That if we're talking about how this chapter is showing us that she can't really feel safe anyway, but then Nicolette does come up and steps up and actually helps her, and I like that. I just have to believe that she's a goodie if she's going to be the person doing that. I don't know.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, she must be a goodie, surely, if she's going to be doing this much good stuff. Counter to what I'm about to say, like in the next chapter.
Okay.
There's this very funny moment. I think the highlight of the chapter to me when Nicolette is asking Snowdrop, like, "Oh, is there anything else that you want to ask for from these brownies?" And I'll read the quote out. Snowdrop says, "I don't need any bonky donks. I know they're a problem." And Nicolette just says, "Oh no." And immediately I cracked up reading that, and then they go off and make these like flaming misshapen bonky. Or no, the bonky donks are great, but they just fuck up the kitchen in the process.
Oh yeah, and it's like they've got like the brownies themselves are covered in burns. One's got like the logo of Bonky Donks like seared into their forehead or something.
Yeah.
But it's
Good
hilarious. Like,
stuff.
like this is one of the peak moments of the reverse Snowdrop formula coming to fruition. I think the only one that topped it for me was the bit where Snowdrop flips off the Kenneteers accidentally and Verona just manually adjusts. I feel like the manual adjustment is a huge part of why that moment works so well.
Oh
Like
yeah.
because the delivery of just everyone did thumbs up and it's like Snowdrop joined them, and then Verona like pushed down her middle finger and lifted up her thumb. There we go. So good.
Yeah, that's good stuff. So yeah, Snowdrop regroups with the trio, and they have a quick chat. And Lucy kind of raises this thought that the run of bad luck that they seem to have been having is because of Alexander and his strife manipulation.
Yes, which I think is the exact same level of tinfoil we were working off last week. So
Yes,
I
in fact,
support
I think
this.
you said something like this last week. So good job
Yeah.
to you.
But yeah, I mean, I guess we should talk about this at the end of next chapter because there's more to this as of next chapter, I think.
Yeah. I also want to touch on just one other thing that we can talk about more after next chapter, which is I actually have this sinking feeling that Alexander is potentially messing with them, or manipulating things a bit. Not to fuck with them, but to get Nicolette really in their good books as a kind of agent of his. So yeah, that's my
Mm,
theory that's starting to emerge. I
I hate
think
that
four.
theory because I can see it.
Yeah, exactly. Let's talk about it more when we get to that part of 4.8.
Yeah, sure.
Anyway, we jump into 4.8, which is from Lucy's perspective, and we start off 2 weeks ago, which was a pretty good surprise.
Yeah, I didn't see that coming. Like I mean I didn't see the two week or 3 weeks skip ahead coming either, but like it was cool. I did not expect after that happened for us to jump back and I think it's good as well because I don't want to lose touch with Kennett and its characters while we're in the school.
Yeah,
Like
me
I don't know
neither.
I don't know how long of the story we're going to be here, but like if Arc 5 is in the school as well, I don't want to see like Arc 6 come back to Kennett because I feel like the story has to sort of wrap up in Kennett. And I like I wouldn't want to get back there in Arc 6 and be like, wait, who's Cherry Pop again?
Mm.
So like I think this is a cool way to make sure that we're still in touch with Kenneth while being at the school. And it sounds like we're going to be doing like trips back and forth anyway, so it shouldn't be a concern, but still.
Yeah, it seems like the way 4.8 goes, we're going to get back into Kennett and have a few Kennett shenanigans as a kind of like, interlude from the Blue Heron Institute, but we'll see.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're back 2 weeks ago, and Lucy is practicing her dueling with Guillermet, and he is giving her pointers on how to be a better Fey duelist.
Yeah. Yeah. So obviously like, we're seeing a bit more where this thing is because this was what she was listed as. She was listed as a fairy sword fighter in that student
Yeah,
guide.
yeah,
I was at this point I was actually sort of ready to say, oh, maybe this is an accurate read on what she's becoming. But Lucy actually kind of says the opposite at the end of the chapter. Um
mm,
so I think she's maybe going to be fairy adjacent, but there's probably more to it. But
mm,
yeah, like I don't know. It was cool because it's sort of like, well, this is where it starts happening. I'm like, oh yeah, we should have expected this. She was listed as such. There must have been
mm.
more to it than just that one time she did it with Gilmay to get Melissa.
Yeah, and that's what we see here. Yeah, interesting. We see how in her element Lucy seems to be in this chapter. During the part that we'll get to where she's kind of sparring with John, and I think that's very interesting. Seeing this type of seeing this side of Lucy and seeing how into it she gets. We'll get to that in a bit though. First, I just want to pull out this line, which I think is very funny, which is she's holding out her spear, and then Lucy shrugged. Is there a point? The boy smiled. To a spear? Which is the fucking dorkiest joke I've ever heard. But I just loved it. Classic Guillermet stuff.
Yeah, it's very funny in a kind of stupid way, but like it just highlights to me like imagine having to deal with the fairy like on the
Mm.
regular. Like if you were a fairy swordsman or whatever, and you did always have a fairy patron around, like God, it would be exhausting. They're so high effort all the
I know,
time.
and there's so much. It's just they're just always on,
Yeah, exactly. Like you could just I could see myself breaking down after like 3 days and being like, "Could you just chill for 5 seconds? Like I'm begging you, just for 5 seconds. Could we just be genuine and
Mm.
straightforward?"
Yep. But no, I mean, oh well, he's. I guess he's genuine. He's not straightforward, I would say.
Yeah, well, Guillermo's always been this interesting. Like Marusika is very much the like like ever since that first interview with her in like 2.2 or whatever, she's
Mm.
dancing around and changing the topic and manipulating the conversation. Whereas Guillermo has this sort of blunt subtlety to him
Mm.
that has always been like very fun. And I still struggle to find the words to explain it or compare it to how Marisica works, but
Yeah.
it was described as a kind of blunter subtlety, and I can't do any better than that. Like I don't feel like that captures it to me, but he is fun in a different way because he's not as like showy and verbose. He's just kind of straight and to the point. He's just manipulating you with that point.
Mm. Yeah. 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 Exactly. I think that's a good way to put it. He is one that's hard to pin down that vibe, right? But I
Yeah.
think that's a good way of phrasing it. So this kind of lesson with Guillerme is basically Guillerme pushing Lucy to really think about who she wants to be, and kind of uses Avery as an example of Avery has stopped and thought about what she wants to be, and we saw that in like the Forest Ribbon Trail and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Lucy has mainly been kind of reacting to situations, and Guillerme asks the question of, okay, well, stop reacting, let's get proactive. What do you want to become? And really, the question is, do you want to be someone who is very aggressive or is willing to concede, right? And she seems to land pretty firmly in the no, I'm not going to concede ground to people. That's not the kind of person that I want to be.
Yeah, he basically gets her to stop being what everyone tells her is the right way to do things. Like even her
Mm,
mum, her mum tells her it's better to run or whatever. And Guillermo's like, well,
yeah.
what do you think? Like it's about her coming out of her shell and what society's sort of telling her. And I mean, like this is Guillermo's fucking fight therapy. Like I love the moment where Lucy's like, I'm pretty mad because I think this is better than the actual therapy that I'm doing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
which is like a hilarious moment to me because she's here fucking sword fighting a fairy and getting free therapy on the side. Um, Even Verona is learning a thing or two. Like, there's that great moment where Verona thinks she has Lucy completely pegged, and then Lucy is like, "Well, no, that's fair. I do hold back a lot," and Verona has to do some
Yeah,
thinking.
that's a fun moment.
Yeah, it's a very fun. I mean, always with the fairy, it's just as fun as it is worrying.
Mm-hmm.
Is how I would describe the fairy. But
Yeah.
there's this other bit as well where like when Lucy is starting to express that idea, you said that she doesn't want to concede as much. She says, "I want to win, but I'm 13 and I'm inexperienced. I'm up against a few hundred or a few thousand years of experience and history here." And the
Mm.
first time I read this chapter, I actually just read that as her talking about fighting Guillerme. Like her
Mm.
saying, "I can't beat you in a sword fight. I'm up against like hundreds of years of sword fighting with you."
Yeah.
But she's just as much talking about like fighting systemic oppression. Like it's a fantastic double speak
Yeah.
line. It was
It's
the
good,
second
isn't
time
it?
I was like, "Oh no, she's talking about like being a black person wanting to sort of fight the system. She's fighting against a lot of history there."
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That is a really good double speak line. Lucy, she's so great.
She really is.
So Guillerme starts showing her a new strategy, kind of helping her do these things to decorate the battleground, kind of taking these swords that she sees with her sight and putting them into the real world, thereby kind of making the battleground hers in a very tangible way. And then, to put this to the test, Johnny Styles shows up to do a bit of sparring practice.
um, yeah, yeah. So before we get to the fight with John, I love Guillermo gives her this speech about how like a weapon should not only be an extension of your body but of yourself. And
Mm,
this is such a fantastic example to me of what I love about the other verse because the sword instructor telling the hero that the weapon must be an extension of your body is such a tired trope.
mm,
And what Pale has done is sort of taken it and added a cool extra twist to it, like oh, we'll add a bit of magic, add an extra layer to it that integrates with the world, and now I'm suddenly enjoying what is usually a trope where I'm like, yeah, okay, I get it. The sword's an extension of your body.
mm-hmm.
So like 10 out of 10. Like this is the sort of stuff I love. How even just a trope that usually makes me roll my eyes, I was like, oh, that's cool.
Yeah,
In this world.
gets put into. I mean, it just is the idea of taking tropes and having them be, humans and their belief reinforce them in a tangible way and kind of retroactively justify them is just so great, and it just leads to so many great moments where you're like, oh shit, this is so awesome,
Yeah, but it's even like I don't even think it just there's not many times where the stories rely on, oh well that is the trope, so it's fine because we've established tropes are allowed here. There's often
Mm,
usually some angle to it, whether it's like this sort of meta self-awareness of the fact they are a trope, or in this case, like, just adding one extra little bit to it that just freshens it up. Like, there's always something that just makes it not feel like a trope.
Mm. Yeah. 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 It keeps it fresh, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, this is in some ways not at all different to just saying the sword must be an extension of your body. But
Mm.
we've had so much build up around what the self is in Pale that now it's sort of like, okay, like, we're going to take that concept and add another layer to it, and have you do extra stuff to it that integrates with this world in such a cool way.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Speaking of people integrating with the world in a cool way, we get this battlefield that Lucy has set up, and she kind of starts using it. Effectively, the way she uses it is as an infinite supply of blades, which is pretty fun. Um, but she kind of is able to shape it in a way that feels very much like how we understand a domain works, right? Like
Yeah.
it has become temporarily analogous to a domain to her, where she can just kind of be like, "Hey, work with me, support me, do what I need you to do," which is great.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely made that same link of thinking this seems similar to what we understand a domain is, as having like a domain being a place that is you, and that's sort of what she
Mm,
does here. Um,
mm,
because I remember, I made this prediction, I think in early arc one, that like Lucy will get a domain, Avery will get a familiar, and Verona will get an implement.
mm,
And like looking at it now, Avery didn't get a familiar. She's gotten Snowdrop, who is this sort of we keep getting told recently boon companions are these like more natural and equitable versions of being a familiar, maybe. And like maybe
mm.
that's what Lucy's getting here. She's not going to get a domain, but she's getting something that is similar in some ways, but like less, she's not claiming the space. It's
Yeah.
not a part of the system where she's like, I own this now. It's like a space where she's like, I'm just going to use this
Eh,
right now and make
a
it.
less colonialist version of
Yeah,
these
basically.
rituals. Yeah.
Yeah, and like Verona, so I said Verona might get an implement, and we know she's got her pair of scissors that she's currently tweaking, and so maybe she won't turn them into an implement, but she's going to do something a bit more novel with them, and maybe that will
Mm,
tie into her plan to become an other in some way. Like, I
mm.
guess we'll see, but yeah, like, so now I'm changing that original theory from Arc One to be what, as wild practitioners, they're going to get more natural and fairer versions of those three big things.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's good. I think it's yeah, I kind of made the connection that we'd seen sort of that with Avery, especially in the past few chapters where Snowdrop has kind of been explicitly called out as, "Hey, are you a familiar?" And Avery and Snowdrop is kind of like, "Oh,
kind
kinda."
of, kind of, but not
Um,
really.
and now with the domain, yeah, I guess that would be quite cool to see if it comes true.
Yeah, especially because like that, this is like such a cool way to take the basic idea, because what those things give you in this world is like a power boost, right? Like having this familiar tied to having this land you claimed. That
Mm,
does give you power in this established system, and these guys are kind of getting something similar-ish with similar-ish power boosts, but they're not having to take like that system sort of requires. Like Lucy doesn't have to
mm,
permanently take a part of the world as a domain.
mm.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, cool. Um, I think we see this fight against John, and I think I'm going to make a big statement here, which is Lucy has become officially my favorite of the Kennetiers. She's just so great. I've just been fully converted into a Lucy fan now.
I mean, she kicks ass in this scene. Like it's yeah, yeah.
She's great. She's a real champion with an uppercase C.
um, yeah, and like this, especially because like her fighting John feels really really important to me, because and she does briefly bring this up, but like one of the first things that happened in this story was her getting traumatized because he held a gun to her head.
Mm,
And now here we are, like 5 weeks later or something. The timeline's getting a bit fuzzy for me again, but she's basically able to go toe to toe against him.
well, for 7 seconds or whatever it is, but yeah, she's
Yeah,
definitely come a long way.
yeah. Just the bravery of being able to do that against him, considering that's how they started off, like, is impressive in its own right.
Mm.
So yeah, it just felt very poetic, which is probably why Guillermo thought of it. That she'd be fighting John like this.
Mm, yeah. Ah, what a great fight it is. It just feels so compelling.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like we don't usually cover them in the podcast because it's it's hard to read too much into it. But like it's so Wildbow fighting scenes are always so great. Like
Yeah,
it was a very visceral one. This one where she's going like fucking knife to knife against John.
yeah, yeah.
And so before we move on and jump back to the present, I feel like we should chat about Guillermo because as you brought up beforehand, he's very important to Avery. He's the one providing her glamour and helping her become her best self. Every
Mm,
time we jump into her head, there's at least one reference to Guillermo says like I've got to do this. He's obviously very important to Lucy now as her sword coach. So he's almost become the most important other or Kennet other to two of our three Kenneteers, which is either very good or very bad.
mm,
Um,
mm.
I'm personally
Yeah.
rooting for good, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think. Well, yeah, I guess it's interesting. I would agree that it's not necessarily all of them, but then I think about how obsessed Verona is with turning into animals, and maybe it is all of them.
See,
Um,
that's I would put yeah. Well, I suppose there's two sides to this because the other side is what does it say about Verona that she's maybe not with Guillermo? See, I would have said Verona is Team Marcy, if anything.
oh, I see. Right.
Which yeah, so I guess just to cut to the chase, like I have this whole theory about like I'm still sticking to my theory that Marcy and Guillermo are like very anti each other, and
Hmm.
Marcy has helped construct all this Carmine Beast bullshit to get that note.
As a play, yeah.
Yeah, which means that I formed a bit more of a theory now, and I'll get into it in a sec, like about how Guillermo is actually a hero, and will be on the side of the Kenneteers to help them fight Marcy. So it's going to be very interesting to see where Verona falls in on all that because she's not as attached to Guillermo as the others, I don't think, and she leans a bit more towards Marcy. So it's gonna. I don't know if there's going to be conflict between the three because of that, but it'll be interesting to see how dominoes start to fall if Marcy and Guillermo if their plans go into action and Verona is a domino for a different side than the other two.
Yeah, I think the thing that it makes me think is just thinking about the interactions that these three have had with the Kennet others. It seems like they've become the most dependent on the Fae, right? Like,
Yeah, which everyone will want them about not doing.
I know.
But here we are.
I'm trying to think. Like, obviously, they seem to have better interactions with like Matthew, for example, or they seem to like Alpi more. But they don't. When you compare it to like their interactions with Matthew, or Alpi, or the goblins, or any of them,
Yeah, how often
they
they're going to them to get help.
exactly.
Yeah.
It seems like they're going to the Fae so much for help, and that's worrying. That's the main thing that jumps out to me as like being pretty worrying.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so to get into my theory, I'm basically my big theory is that Guillermo is actually going to be kind of a good guy with at least within this story. I'm not saying he's
Twist.
a good person, but I think like within the scope of the story we're talking about here, he's going to be on the right side.
Mm,
Because like we used to talk to like the summer court is this more blunt, subtle. And
mm,
they seem to in particular be obsessed with these like very Greek hero tropes, and so I could see it being the thing that like Guillermo is actually getting a genuine kick out of being like Danny DeVito's character in Hercules, like the
mm.
person who trains the heroes.
Yeah.
Um, so while he's mourning his beloved and needing to protect Kennet, he's actually finding enjoyment out of
Out of
taking.
big playing this tutor role.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think maybe this is how he's getting his enjoyment, and like he does as well. He wants to stick it to Marcy and stop her from getting the note. So
Mm,
um, yeah, like I'm basically building all this to construct a scenario where Guillermo is actually going to be an ally for the Kenneteers,
mm,
which will be, I think, very fun. Like seeing Guillermo and Marcy kind of turn into two sides of a conflict could be very
mm,
entertaining.
mm. Yeah, that would
Because
be
I
interesting.
assume they'll just be like dominoes that have been getting built up for 20 years by each of them fucking falling left and right, and it could be a complete clusterfuck.
Mm, yeah. I wonder if that will happen. I mean, I guess if we get to the big bad has been Marcy the whole time, then something like that will probably happen. We'll see.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I don't know. There's going to be like angles to it because I think Marcy will have been involved in the Carmine Beast killing thing, but again, I think it's just to destabilize the region to get this note. So it almost feels like that will. I could see it being alongside the Carmine Beast stuff. Like we find out
Yeah,
Marcy was one of the culprits, and then we find out she doesn't give a shit at all about the Carmine Beast stuff.
yeah.
She's just after this note. And then we have to do the fairy stuff, and then it's like once that's resolved, Edith
Then
or
we get
whatever the
the
fuck
big
walks out
finale, or
wearing the
yeah,
fur. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Cool. We'll see. So yeah, we jump back. We jump back to the present, and the group are discussing with Verona what she has to do, what she should do.
Yes, this is in reference to her dad actually maybe being sick, probably.
Yeah, almost certainly. Although, again, man, how funny would it be if it was just a manipulation, and we can be like, "Oh wait, no, there's no ambiguity here. He's just a piece of shit. Go back to school."
I mean, at that point, I don't feel like anyone would blame Verona for just sort of doing whatever to just cut ties.
Mm,
Like
yeah,
if she
yeah,
flipped out and did something drastic at that point, I'd find it really hard to look within myself and find a side that blames her for that or thinks it wasn't the right call. Like,
yeah, for sure.
um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, yeah, this is tough because I like even after reading it twice, I don't know what I would recommend Verona do.
Mm,
Because she's very attached to this idea of not playing his game, but as she says, that's not really what this is. But then, kind of maybe it is, or it's a way to get trapped back into doing that. But
mm,
also, he is her dad, and she does love him on some level. And it's just it's that class, as we said, it's that Wildbow situation of it's worse than I could have possibly imagined. And I hate this, but I love it. I can't wait to see where it goes.
yeah. There's no good resolution to this, right? Like, think about, okay, what if he dies? Like, what if he's even more bedridden? Like, what happens if he gets better and then he's shitty about Vernon just not being there when he was sick?
Yeah,
Like,
like Rad
there's
Ray style.
literally no good outcome.
Yeah, yeah. I wonder if there is like some connection we should draw between Rad Ray and his kid, and Verona.
Ooh.
Um, yeah, no, him getting like proper bedridden and actually needing to rely on Verona would be fucking awful
Mm.
because it's like
Mm-hmm.
if he's genuinely sick and bedridden, that's more of a
Mm.
situation where it's like, okay, maybe she should do stuff, but it's like he's poisoned the relationship to the point where it's like, in this instance, maybe not. Like, and he says he's called her mum as well, so like you just know if she goes back to visit him in the hospital, the mum's going to be there as well, and that'll be a whole fucking can of worms. Like, it's just,
Yep.
uh, I almost want Verona to just be what, to just say, fuck it, I'm staying at school.
Mm.
Yeah, what a mess.
Yeah. Yep. Things that aren't a mess, though. Lucy. I mean, I know we're in her head here, but as a recent convert to the Lucy number one crew, she's just so on top of everything. Like in this interaction, there's a few moments where Avery seems like she's about to kind of push a little bit too far or just step a toe slightly over the line. And Lucy's right there to be like, no, no, cut that line of questioning out or whatever. She's great. She's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like she handles this really well, and it doesn't seem to drain her like it did at the start of the story to kind of manage these two. Like it's just
Mm.
this very natural extension of her. Like, I mean, obviously the theme of this chapter is Lucy has kind of found herself,
Mm.
and that that's sort of found here where she's just sort of knows what she thinks she sort of wants to happen, and is just able to express that a lot easier than like the stressful way it was happening in arcs 1 and 2 that
Mm.
sort of led to her having that meltdown after Avery did the Pam thing.
Yeah, I mean, I guess now that she is actually getting more support from the Kenneteers, she can kind of be herself a bit more, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think her therapy and her therapy have both helped.
Do you say therapy?
Yeah,
That's very good.
have both been helping too. Yeah, I just thought of that then. I hope it comes
Excellent work.
across in audio.
You're a
Um,
champion. Yeah. For anyone
uh,
who missed it, it's what F A E.
AERAPY.
Yeah, therapy. Like if you're gonna spell therapy, but you've messed up two letters by mistake.
um yeah, it's actually really interesting. Like if people are thinking about rereading chapters as well, I quickly skimmed 4.6, which was our other Lucy chapter post time skip, with
Mm.
this chapter in mind, and it's really like it sort of it reframed that chapter a bit for me, like seeing her interactions with the other kids about jumping off the bridge and her
Mm.
confidence and just kind of being like, not for me. seeing how she manages to actually hold back against Ray, fucking stirring her pot.
Yeah,
It's interesting seeing that stuff reframed with like Guillerme's sword lessons in mind.
yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, cool. So the trio have their meeting with Alexander, and they start discussing the you know who landlord situation. He who must not be named, as he's called.
I think we used that joke about Alexander like last week. We got to say it about whoever's not in the conversation. Um, Also, yeah, Nicolette is here, and I know that you've got your conspiracy theory that I don't like because
Mm-hmm.
it actually adds up. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but again, I've put her on Team Goody. I'm gonna stick with that, so I'm ready to be bamboozled. But I like Nicolette in this scene is delightful because she's clearly ribbing Alexander as like as much as she can. Um, she has her moments though. Like sometimes I'm just like Nicolette, you're such an idiot. She talks about she actually knows one of the tenants of
Mm.
Bristow's place, and it's the boy from her interlude. Like there was a moment in her interlude where
Yes.
she was like, "Oh, I got this blood of insanity, and I related to the
Yep.
boy because I was insane, so I'm helping take care of him." And now we find out that Nicolette's version of helping take care of him is handing him over to
Yeah.
Bristow.
Shacking him
Um,
up with Bristow, which
which
clearly is a mistake.
yeah, it's just like, Nicolette, I love you, but sometimes you're just a bit of an idiot.
Mm.
And yeah, she's trying to help Melissa at the moment, right? And you sort of see that, like, we saw the same thing where it's like, oh, I'm helping Melissa. There's some doctor going to get in contact with her. It's like, yeah, okay. I mean, I guess that is helpful, but sometimes, yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I
Mm.
want to be entirely team Nicolette, but she does stuff like this, and I'm like, Nicolette, what are you doing?
Mm.
You know this isn't right. Like, tell me that you know this isn't right, please.
Well, it's because she's secretly a villain. I'm calling it. Um, God, I mean, we'll dive into the apartment complex obviously next chapter, but shit, it's just so interesting
Oh my
the
god.
fact that she collects these aware, and they all have their own horrifying stories.
Yeah, like I would 100% watch a TV show that's like set in this apartment complex. Like, each
Mm.
week focus on a different tenant. Yeah, like it's so rich. The just all the ideas, and like you can almost feel that the extra material that we're going to dive into this week was because like Wildbow just started thinking of ideas for Alexander's little bits here, and he just couldn't help himself, and suddenly we had this 8,000 word extra material piece because it was just so much fun to write.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, definitely. So something interesting that happened here, and maybe it's just because we're in Lucy's head that this was more obvious, but I feel like Avery, because of her background of not having close friends, just sees anyone who's like not overtly aggressive to her as an ally and is willing to just like completely open up her heart to them. It She's not prepared for people who lie to her face and are secretly working against her, as Alexander almost certainly is.
Yeah, I mean, Alexander's definitely an extreme case because I think if you asked her, she'd be like, "Oh yeah, we can't trust him." But like, she's got this natural, like,
Like openness.
yeah,
Yeah.
and this is something like Lucy and Avery have talked about. Like, Lucy kind of defaults to not really trusting people; they have to prove that they're trustworthy.
Mm.
Whereas like Avery tends to default to trusting people, and I think it means in a conversation like this with Alexander, like you said, when he's not being outwardly aggressive, she kind of defaults to trusting him a bit, and accidentally reveals more information than she probably should have.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. She really should have not done that, but that's all right. Speaking of what's in Avery's head, can you imagine? Okay, so there's this quote where they're describing people in the apartments, and there's this description of the old man who has fallen so deep into the pattern of watching television all day, every day, that he stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped using the washroom. And my immediate reaction to this was, is that Grumble? Has Grumble somehow gotten into this apartment complex? And that can't be the answer, but it feels like it's intentionally evocative of what Avery was thinking about with Grumble before she went to the Blue Heron Institute, right?
Yeah, like I hadn't put that together, but as soon as you said it, I was like, yes, like that was pretty much the exact beat we hit the last time we saw him in person.
Mm,
So I don't think it is him in here,
mm,
but like, is he on his way there? Like, because they one of the things that comes up is like, oh, could you save the TV person? It's like, no, the couch potato has lost something that cannot be recovered.
yeah.
and it's like, oh, okay, like should we be worried about Grumble? I've
Mm.
got to admit, my response to reading that one the first time was, "Hey, who told Wildbow?"
Hey, how dare you?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Like, I think we're worried about Grumble because the TV he's watching is like conservative news, but maybe this is just another reason to be worried.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. So, oh, okay. Here's another one that I liked. Another Lucy moment that I really liked when Nicolette starts serving tea and is offering like sugar cubes, and Lucy's thought is, sugar cubes? A woman serving the tea? What was this? The 1950s? Which is just like such a great way
It's
to
so good.
summarize the whole vibe that Alexander seems to have around him.
Yeah, exactly. It's a thing. Like Pale continues to kind of scratch away at the line between like the metaphor and real life.
Mm,
Yeah, it's such a good line.
yeah. It's good times. Okay, so Nicolette takes out some dossiers, kind of outlining who she thinks will be sent to Kennet to investigate, and we get
Uh,
to read those dossiers in our bonus
yeah,
material, so we'll talk about those then.
yeah.
Um, and then almost immediately after that, Lucy kind of leads the charge on demanding some form of recompense from Alexander in exchange for the huge mess that he is dumping onto this trio.
Yeah, I love this so much because this whole the whole first half of the conversation, he's sort of like, oh, I'm being very nice and I'm sticking to the deal and I'm helping you. And like I was just reading this, I was like, no, you're not. Like
Yeah.
you're not. And so just the moment where Lucy's like, hey, fuck you, you've wronged us. It was just it was delicious. Like I was like, yes, like let him have it. Um Especially because like they finally sort of bring up the point, hey, we could always just go and tell Bristow, hey, it's us, nothing to do with Alexander. Please leave Kenneth alone. And
Mm.
I think they even bring up siding with him, which then Alexander's like, I'll expel you. But like, there's middle ground there.
Yeah, especially if they do expel him, they have all the more reason to make sure Bristow wins the scrap, right?
Yeah, it's a good point. They could just make a deal with Bristow to get reinstated.
Yep.
But yeah, especially because and like I'm 99% sure Alexander's aware of this, but like Alexander's whole thing is, oh, it's actually fine because we don't have anything to worry about Bristow going there because he's just going there looking for my huge hidden cache of power, which I don't actually
Mm.
have. And I was just sitting there and thinking, look, let's be honest, we all know that there is actually a giant cache of power sitting somewhere in this town. That is just like, we don't want Bristow to end up walking out of there with the fucking Carmine Beast's power on Axe.
Mm.
That sounds even worse.
Mm-hmm.
So there's just so many layers of this where I'm just like, fuck off, Alex. You know exactly what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Very problematic. So okay, so they have this conversation where they're kind of asking Alexander for these things, and there are a lot of things proposed, but actually there isn't that much that's concretely agreed upon here. Um, One of the only things is that Alexander will avoid kind of knowing what classes they're taking as a way of like not learning that much more information. There are other things that are proposed of like, oh, you will get 3 extra months of time and all that stuff, but there's never an agreement on that. So I'm kind of it seems a little unsure exactly what Alexander has agreed to here,
Yeah, I
apart
definitely
from keeping not paying too close attention to them.
Yeah, I definitely struggled to, even on my second read, understand exactly what was agreed to and what was just proposed. I
Yeah.
think the only two things I'm confident were actually agreed on were the not looking into classes, and I think the 3 month extension was something they said yes to. But it's like I don't know. I feel like you got to get even in this world, maybe get like a written agreement. Don't rely on verbal contracts unless it's like
Mm.
very defined.
Yeah. Yeah. You need some more concrete stuff, I guess.
Just at the very least, because only actually agreeing to the written one means that you can like check the wording. It's a lot harder to slip in some phrasing that can be abused on the letter of the law later if it's written down. I think.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Um. So okay. So the other thing that we get confirmed here is Alexander is not behind the strife that has been plaguing them.
Yeah, which seems
Nor
to
is
have at
Nicolette.
least hit Snowdrop and probably Lucy.
Yes. And so they think it's a defection of one of Alex's other students. Which, first of all, it's hilarious that Nicolette's the one that calls that out, knowing what we know. But the second thing that this made me realize is, oh my god, this is great. We might get a chance to see Chase or Seth being taken down by Lucy with a sword, which is all I really ever wanted.
Yeah, exactly. It's almost like I don't think it's Chase or Seth, just because them turning out to be like extra evil or like evil or whatever just seems so obvious. Like
Mm,
just it was so immediately obvious to me. It's like, well, can we go ask Chase and Seth?
mm-hmm.
They seem like such obvious candidates. I feel like it'll have to be something else.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, we learned about someone who would be capable of something similar in the next extra material. So
Yeah.
probably not him, but like, yeah, I feel like it'll be something a little bit more than just, oh, it was Chase or Seth. But maybe I'm wrong. I'm also prone to overthinking these things.
Yeah. It must be Chase or Seth so that we get a chance to fight them. That's
I
all
mean,
I
I'm definitely
want.
on board with seeing them get put in their place. Um, so just again, like Nicolette is just so fun in this conversation. Like her on the sidelight, just like the way she's like, oh, you three are great, and Alexander's like, either be quiet or leave, and she's like, yeah, I'm gonna stay. Um, there's definitely nothing that jumped out to me that disproves your theory, but I just
Yeah.
enjoy the idea of Nicolette sitting here enjoying the Kenneteers tearing Alex apart too much to believe in your theory. Um,
Yeah. Although possibly that's being allowed slash encouraged by Alex because he wants to have an agent, close to them.
no, that's absolutely possible, but I don't like
Yeah, fair enough. Fair
it.
enough.
um, yeah, and I mean, obviously, like, Nicolette kind of rounds this out with a comment about how fun it is because she uses this term negative binding, which I don't think we
Mm,
knew. But
mm,
basically, this idea that you can fight things with their opposites, and these three are kind of the opposite of Alexander, who is representative of the system, and these three representative of like wildness, I suppose,
mm,
to use the term wild practitioner. Um, and just like how much they're able to throw him off his game just by not conforming to the system in any way. Like it's just so fun, and I'm glad Nicolette is like our audience surrogate for this scene and is just enjoying it as much as we are.
mm. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I found myself giggling at a lot of the things that Nicolette was kind of snarkily saying throughout this scene.
Yeah, like you felt like she just couldn't help but like come in and be like, "I love you three." After the second half of this conversation, by the way, like
Mm,
she seemed so genuinely on board with them, and I hope that's the case.
hmm Yeah. Um, yeah, I hope so too. I know I brought up the Nicolette's actually evil theory, but I really do hope that it's not the case. Anyway, so that's the end of 4.8. And we now get to the extra material, which is those dossiers that Nicolette threw out in the previous chapter. And they're pretty much just notes on the 6 people three of which we might be likely to see in Kennet.
I think it was at least three, and honestly, after reading these dossiers, I kind of hope it's all six. Well,
I
actually,
know.
I could pass up on the psychopath guy,
Yeah.
that we'll get to just because like he's scary. Um,
I also think the kind of golden age hero type, the Groundhog Day
oh
protagonist,
yeah,
probably is too easily able to be talked out of attacking Kennet just because he seems like he'd be a chill dude.
that's
Um,
true. That's true. But
so that probably
I'd
means
love
they're
to
not
see
going to be
him.
there. Oh yeah, me too, 100%. Anyway, let's
Yeah,
talk through them
let's go into
each.
them.
First is the Gilded Lily,
Uh
Clem.
yes. She's just well, I mean, she's just a real fucking tragedy, isn't
It's
like
so
it's
sad. This is really horrifying. Like, well, okay, the most horrifying part is one of the first things that happens is she gets granted 3 wishes, which are all kind of monkey's pawed. One is for her best friend to stay with her for the summer, which happens because her friend's parents are getting divorced or something like that.
yeah.
One is for her family to get thousands and thousands of dollars, which becomes the life insurance payment for the mother or something like that. And then the third wish is that she has a dolphin to ride. And I was so sad we don't get to find out how that manifests, which is maybe the only thing I've ever wanted.
Yeah, I think this is a brilliant little bit of writing. Like I think it was very intentional. Wildbow was just like, and a dolphin to ride, and I'm not going to tell them what happened
How
with that
that went
one.
wrong. Yeah, exactly.
it's brilliant, and I hate it.
Yeah, it's good.
like I think what's really funny about this Gilded Lily segment is it ends up being about half of the entire extra material. This extra material,
Yeah,
it's like 8,000 words. It's like the length of a normal chapter.
yeah,
Usually they're a fair bit shorter. But like this one, it's like half of it is just this one out of the six people, and I was
yeah.
just like,
Uh, because it's comprised of like 20 little, paragraph long short
yeah,
stories, basically.
yeah, and I think like again, I'm convinced it's just because I reckon they were as much fun to write as they were to read.
Oh
Like,
yeah,
I assume I don't think Wildbow sat down and was like, "This is going to be half of it." He was just like, again, like I'm just assuming he was just like, "I'll just write a couple of examples," and just ended up being so much fun. It was like, "Oh, I should probably move on to one of the others now," and that's why there's that
what?
bit where it's like,
Yeah,
and now we sort of skip ahead because it's like, okay, I need to stop at some point and do
yeah.
the others.
Yeah, no, 100%. I'm 100% sure that Wildbow just has like a kind of list of interesting magical items that he never really got a chance to put into this story, and he doesn't think is going to work in. And he's like, "All right, now's my chance. Check them all off."
Yeah. I mean, as you said, I think you compared this to like an SCP thing.
Oh yeah,
I
it
I
totally is.
I haven't read any of those, so I called it like a Magnus Archives highlight reel, but that's
Right,
probably about the
very
same thing.
similar. Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
it was so fun to read. These are great, like little short stories of
Yeah,
various kinds of horror. Like poor
yeah.
Clem, it just keeps going, and she's just trying to live a normal life. Like you kept saying, she's like it's like one of the later ones. It's like she picked up a matchbox because she liked the artwork, and then it like burn her whole house down or some shit. It's just like, god damn it! Like this
Oh,
poor girl
Clem,
is
you
just
poor thing.
she's just trying to be like so wholesome, and the world is falling apart around her.
Yeah. Oh, poor Clem. Um, yeah. I mean, I want to spend more time talking about each of these, but maybe we should take a leaf out of Wildbow's book and move on to the next ones.
Yeah, like yeah, this is one of those things where like I almost just want to read out the whole extra
I
material because it's
know.
so fun, but
It's so good.
this shouldn't just be a quoting the extra material show.
Yeah.
So the only other thing I want to sort of touch on here, like as we start to get into them, is I feel like there's a link between all of the aware and like mental illness, or
Mm,
like that's sort of the metaphor we're exploring here is the aware as people suffering from mental illnesses.
mm,
And look, I'm the furthest thing from being qualified to diagnose anything like that, so I'm not going to get bogged down in trying to map each one of these to a specific mental illness because, like, I have no idea what the fuck I'm talking about there. Um,
mm.
but I think, like, overall, there's this fairly apt metaphor for like some real life structures that are sort of like, oh, we saved you from being homeless because of your mental illness. Now, live here and do this for us. Like the
Yeah.
exploitation of people with disabilities, mental or
Mm,
physical.
mm, interesting. I mean, even without the parallels to mental illnesses, that is just what it is. Like, I'm gonna give you the bare minimum. Sorry, not even give. Charge you for the bare minimum
Yeah.
thing that is like and completely make you kind of indentured into my web as a result, right?
Yep.
He doesn't seem to demand any kind of tangible favors from most of them, but even the fact that they live there is a favor to him, right?
Yeah, the fact that he's charging them rent on top, it was just a bit where I was like, come on, man. Like
Yeah,
they're already magically charging your diagram or some bullshit.
yeah.
Should they really I guess rent could be a metaphor in these dossiers, but like no, I get the feeling it's like as well as powering
No,
his
no,
diagram, they're
yeah.
paying five
They're
hundred
they're
bucks a
paying
month.
two types of rent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
Um,
guarantee it's only the financial one that gets lessened when they do jobs for him.
oh, and of course they probably don't know that
Oh,
that he's like feeding off of them. Of course they wouldn't.
no, he would. Well, isn't it so? As aware, most of them aren't fully grasping like this
Yeah, they
world.
they have loose of like areas of knowledge. Some of them know about others. Some of them know about practitioners.
Yeah, different
etc.
levels.
Yeah. So next up are Shelley and Daniel Alitzer, who are a Bright Eyes and a Glamour Drowned, respectively.
Yes, and I think what's very fun about the concept of these two is we now sort of have straight up counters to the fairy and Kennet. Like I'm pretty convinced
Mm,
we'll see these two, just because I feel
yes.
like the fairy in particular have been built up in this story as kind of the scariest others in Kennet. Like we
Yeah.
saw Guillerme was able to scare Nicoletta out of town just by promising to give her what she wants.
Yeah.
So the idea that there are like specialist fairy hunters, and like it would be crazy not to use them because the fairy have seemed like the most airtight others to use for Kennet up until now. So a specific counter to them is just too good not to use.
Yeah. I mean, I'm very certain that we're going to see at least Shelley, if not both of them, right?
Yeah, I feel like I need to see Danny because Danny has been set up as this Chekhov's gun to me because Shelley is like this actual fairy assassin or whatever. Whereas
Mm,
was Danny has this very like most of the time he's just very sad or whatever, but when he comes out of his shell, like he comes out swinging.
mm-hmm,
And like to me, that's just almost too enticing to not use because just the idea that Danny will just sort of be on the outskirts of the battlefield or something, and then something will click and he'll just
mm.
go fucking ham.
Yeah, he'll just
Um,
go wild.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, worrying. Yeah, I'm especially worried about Shelley, I think. She's just, I don't know. The vibe I got was all the like scariness of a fae, but they won't even, take a long time with their plots. She'll just fuck you right up.
Yeah, they don't have the patience of immortality. Because we've kind of skipped over the harrowing backstory for how these two ended up where they are.
Mm,
It's fucking insane on so many
yeah,
levels.
horrifying.
Again, like,
Horrifying.
oh, we can't just turn this into the quote the extra material thing, but like, go read it again. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
I think,
God.
yeah, or maybe like these two could be because I guess I'm just talking about my theory of Guillerme and Marisica becoming a thing for a chunk of the story. Maybe that's what'll happen. These Aware will show up, and Shelley and Daniel, as specific like fairy counters, will press those two to actually have to tip over some of their dominoes.
Mm,
Like maybe this will be like this will be the thing. It's like, oh, we've got to go deal with Shelley and Daniel, and then it turns into like all the shit Guillerme and Marisica have cooking, also just explodes, and
mm-hmm.
Shelley and Daniel are only a quarter of the fight at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll see. Okay. So next up, number 4 on the list is Kevin No One, who is the evil-eyed.
Yeah, I mean, he just seems like a pretty pleasant fellow, pretty normal.
Yeah. No, he's okay. I mean, okay. The quote that is great here, because he's such a psychopath, the part that really jumped out to me about this bit, I'm going to read out now. He is a dangerous, deficient human who carries some personality disorders. He is greedy, resentful of the world, and indulges in his superiority over others where possible. He was considered for the Belanger Circle. And as soon as I read that, I was like, oh, come on. And he's not even rejected. Like, oh my God, it's such a mess. Basically, he was rejected because his personality disorder would make him too hard to control effectively,
Yeah.
which is wild.
Okay, so I know I said I wasn't going to get bogged down in trying to link any of these Aware to specific mental illnesses as part of the metaphor, but
Mm,
wait, I've definitely read stuff about how like CEOs and serial killers can often have very similar brain structures or like
mm,
the same like underlying psychopathic disorders, but it's like it comes down to how you were raised, whether you end up getting into power as a CEO or executive of some kind, and whether you become a serial killer. And like that was what jumped out to me here. Like is just like Kevin seems like someone who it's like, he grew up in rougher circumstances, developed these personality disorders. Like now he's not okay for the Belanger circle, so he's sort of turned into this magical serial killer instead of an augur.
mm, yeah. Um, uh, it's how would he possibly be a good fit for the like? How can you write that sentence in a dossier and not re-examine your family?
Well,
Right?
because if they're psychopaths as well, that it just yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. God. Anyway, that's all we have to say about Kevin No One.
Yeah, I am torn between wanting him to show up and not because I
Oh
think there's some
yeah.
really interesting stuff to do there. Like, especially if Nicolette comes with the Kenneteers to help protect Kennet, there's
Yeah.
interesting counterplay between those two, but also scary, and I do not want.
Mm. Yeah. I think he's fun to read this 1 or 2 paragraphs about, but he would be really unfun to have in the story. I mean, we'll see. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah. So next up, Ted Havens, who is described as world weary and world wise.
This might be just like conceptually my favorite of all these ideas. Like, this is such a fucking whirlwind. Like, Clem is obviously so fun, and like the list of items was maybe the highlight. But just like, I don't know, maybe I'm just a sucker for time loop stories. But just this conceptually having a character with this experience was just the most fascinating to me.
Yeah. Yeah. So he's basically like a fantasy novel hero mixed with a bit of Groundhog Day, which is fun. But the thing that I really liked is in the kind of final bits of the description of this is he's described as like he's a hero, right? Like he seems to be, a heart of gold kind of hero type, meaning that the only way Bristow can get him to do things for him is by kind of manipulating him to think that they are for the greater good.
Yeah. I want to read out the quote that ends his section of the dossier, which
Mm.
is Ted is one of these people enjoying the karma of literally countless lifetimes well lived. When he does
Mm.
leave the complex, he does so because he believes it serves the greater good. This isn't always or even often the case. And like I saw that because that last line just read to me as Alexander editorializing. But you raise a good point where like this could be because it's Bristow who convinces him to leave, by convincing him it is good. Although, again, what Alexander and Bristow thinks is good doesn't seem to line up very often. So it still kind of is editorializing. But yeah.
Yeah. I do hope we see him, but I think we won't because I don't think there's any way that the kind of innocentness of these three children won't get through to him if we do see him, which would be an interesting writing challenge.
Yeah, yeah. I guess what's interesting to me about this concept is, it's one of those cool twists on like the chosen one trope,
Yes.
where like because this is the chosen one after they've defeated something that they said was bigger than his town or something. So like again, like Ted Havens' thing is just a whole story in and of itself. It's
Mm.
fascinating. But he has done his chosen one thing, and now it kind of sounds like what the world does is after it's done with these chosen ones and it's given him a million lifetimes to defeat this thing. Now it's just kind of like, okay, fuck off. We're not really going to help you succeed. In fact, we're going to actively stop you from succeeding.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's been a lot of like sequels. Like you will see a sequel movie that will be like, oh, between the first movie and now the hero has hit rough times again, but they like
Mm.
reclaim their hero-ness. I feel like what's
Mm.
interesting is that doesn't seem to be on the cards for Ted. He's not the protagonist here. Um,
No.
so
Yeah.
what do you do with a hero who's done their hero thing? The world's kind of rejecting them now, and then they show up in the middle of this other conflict. Like, I find that fascinating, and like
Yeah. No, I
maybe
think it would be very interesting. You're right.
there's like a more interesting spin than just he turns onto the goodies team, but like he's just someone who doesn't really have a purpose now. He's got potentially thousands of years of memories and nothing to do with them.
Yeah. Interesting. What an interesting concept for a character. Yeah, and then we get to the final of the described residents here. Sharon Grigg, the skeptic.
I mean, this one's very fun. The poor fourth wall takes a real beating for this last entry.
She is the scariest to me, not only because she's a power dampener, but she's also like an alt-right conspiracy nut, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Like terrifying both in terms of the ability and how disruptive she would be, but also in terms of personality. And I was trying to think to myself, who would I least like to interact with, Kevin Nolan or Sharon Grigg? And I'm not sure of the answer to that.
I'll just hang out by myself, I think. And
Yeah.
just have dinner alone. Yeah. Yeah, again, I did want to get bogged down in tying these to specific mental illnesses or anything, but it's hard not to tie this to like conspiracy like flat earth, anti-vax, alt-right, QAnon bullshit.
Mm,
And what I love about this is it's not just that she's a character like that, but like the idea of her powers as someone who's a power dampener. I think it works because with people like that, trying
mm,
to engage with them just brings you down.
mm-hmm.
So it's like, trying to use magic around her as a skeptic just kind of brings you down to her level, and you can't
Yeah.
argue with her. You can't convince
Yeah.
her.
Yeah.
She's just going to drag you down to her level of not being able to do magic. And I think that that's just such a brilliant metaphor.
Yep. Yep.
Like
Yeah,
I
it's
kind of
pretty
want
good.
her to I kind of want her to show up just so I can hate her. I'm just gonna hate
Yeah,
her
I
in that
know she's
fashion.
gonna
I
be
can
such a
tell.
nightmare. I want her to get a beat down.
Yeah, I just wanted to show up so I can be like, oh fuck everything you stand for. Yeah,
Yeah.
can't wait.
Yeah, but that's the end of the bonus material. So good stuff by Wildbow there. Loved it.
Yeah,
But before
that was like a very long one. So I know it's not sustainable as an expectation, but that was just a brilliant extra material.
Yeah, yeah. It was great. I loved it too. But before we end our show, we've got to dive into some pale predictions that were left by our audience in our Pale Predictor app. So if you have a prediction on how the story is going to go, leave it in use the link down below to leave it in our form, and we might read it out on the show.
Yeah. So quickly before we go, let's chat about any predictions we got through Pale Predictor.
Mm.
What have you got for us, Ruben?
Yes, I pulled out one from Lapsed Classicist, kind of pulling out the fact that with Guillermet having become so important to the trio, especially being Lucy's, in air quotes, wise old mentor, and we now have Shelley being set up as somebody who specializes in taking down Fae, it does seem to be indicating that Guillermet maybe isn't long for the world.
Oh, that makes so much
I
sense.
know,
I
a
hate it.
bummer. And here's another one for you, which is who better to kind of bring Avery's over dependence on glamour to a head than people who specialize in taking down glamour? Like,
Yeah.
there's almost certainly if Daniel and Shelley come into this scene, to this story, going to be seen where like Avery's over reliance on glamour comes to a head and is a detraction in this fight, which I think will be excellent if it does
Oh god,
happen.
both of those things seem inevitable now that you've said them. Like Avery having her confidence kind of shattered,
Mm-hmm.
and then hopefully having her heroic moment where she just builds it up naturally out of herself would be brilliant. But yeah, of course Guillermet is the fairy who'd get killed. It'll turn out yeah, he actually is the good fairy and now he's dead and Marisica's fine.
Yeah.
That sounds about right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whew. Yeah. So, what did you pull out as your prediction?
I've pulled out a theory from Fairlax, who has basically just labeled this Chekhov's brownies. And basically, he's just saying that someone being tricked into acknowledging the brownies and tricking their trap card is going to be like a big moment. And Fairlax has stated their possibility of it being Alexander, which I just kind of love because the idea of Alexander being brought down by this contract and like such a strong example of like the system, I think is actually very
Mm,
fun. I'm not
mm.
sure how you could possibly trick him into doing that, but it's a fun idea.
Yeah, I wonder how it would be possible to trick Alexander or anybody into that. But I definitely agree that the brownies. I mean, I thought it was for the purpose of the snowdrop stuff, but that obviously was kind of smoothed over. So I don't know. I suspect this is true.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it does feel like the idea of Chekhov's brownies does feel like it has some merit.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Thanks to Lapse Classist and Fairlax for those predictions. Next up on our agenda here, it's time to revisit answers that were left to our discussion question from last week.
Yeah.
So our discussion question was: do that homework that Radical Ray set.
Yep.
And we got a few answers on that homework. So we got a response from Man Magnificent, who talks about lost others as a power source, mainly for a domain specifically, and how kind of others that are powered by like energy to do with moving between places would influence somewhere that is by definition static, right? Which I think is an interesting kind of mix up to throw in it, and led to a few quite interesting thoughts about how it might work.
Yeah, like I could see it making it easier for you to get to the paths, or maybe you can have a shortcut out of the paths back to your domain.
Mm.
Yeah, although I wonder if it makes your domain like isn't something Man Magnificent said it makes your domain less tethered to reality. So maybe it's easier to lose it. I don't know.
Mm.
I don't know if you can lose your domain. I hope not. Doesn't sound
Well,
ideal.
we've touched on the idea of not losing your domain, but like if you spend too much time in your domain, you kind of become untethered from reality, right?
Yeah.
Which sounds a bit like being lost. So one of the things that Man Magnificent touches on is maybe that would be much easier to happen if you're kind of making a domain that's been infected with like lost energy.
That makes sense.
And we also got one from Beard of Valor, who gave very long and comprehensive answers. So we won't go into them too much, but to kind of highlight it in at a higher level, we got a blade that was kind of infused with Fey or Goblin energy that creates these kind of festering wounds that feel good to receive, which was pretty terrifying. So that was a fun one.
So that's like, so the goblin energy, I assume, is contributing to like the festering.
Yes.
And then the fairy energy is like making you enjoy getting cut by it. That's the craziest part. Like, even just the fairy part to me would be worth like a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty wild. We also got a familiar infused with lost energy that kind of made it more slippery, and a domain that was blessed by a god of mischief, which led to like it having some kind of mischievous properties. A lot of depth to this, so I recommend going to read them. But it was interesting. I got the vibe that Beard of Valor has thought about this before. Maybe too much. There was some indications in there that there was some potentially terrifying stuff going on behind the surface for Beard, but we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah. I'm just thinking, like, a domain blessed by a god of mischief. I mean, I don't know if that's what you want for your domain. Like, that seems like it might cause you more trouble than it helps.
Yeah.
For your house.
Yeah, no, definitely. I agree. I worry maybe that's not a
go for a god of like keeping things in the right spot or something.
Yeah, a god of cleanliness and order. Yeah, so those were some answers that were left to our discussion question. So thanks to those users for that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think we're going to take the week off discussion questions this week. Everyone did so well on the previous homework that we're not setting any this week.
Yeah. No homework this week. Take a break. Take some time off. Take a 3-day vacation back to Kennet.
Yeah, exactly. See what's going on there. Protect it from the aware, etc.
If you want to leave your thoughts on these chapters or on this episode, you can do so by heading to our discussion thread, which will be linked down in the show notes below. Yeah, leave us some thoughts. Why not?
Yes, you can also find us on Twitter at MediaMD Podcast, or just search for Power Reflections. We show up. It's like our name, but the tag. It's a whole thing. It's where the live reads happen, episode announcements, all that jazz.
Yeah, exactly. Why don't you also check out our website, doofmedia.com? It has all of the other shows on the Doof Media Network, of which, I don't know if you know this, but we are one of them. But there are other great shows on there too. What You Say is a classic. But there's, of course, all kinds of great shows. The Doofcast, the flagship show of the Doof Network. All kinds of things for all kinds of interests. So I'm sure you'll find something that you'll like.
Yep. We've got our Doof and Chill coming up. We're all going to play Among Us. Hopefully all 7 Doof hosts will be there. So that should be a lot of fun. I haven't actually played that game, but I've seen a bit of it on the YouTubes, and it looks like fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure it will be very fun. So if you want to support the Doof Network, you can become a patron by going to patreon.com/doofmedia and leaving us some coin. It's a great way to support the network and help us do all kinds of cool stuff.
Yes, and don't forget, Wildbow has a Patreon, patreon.com/Wildbow. We're all tenants in his apartment complex of this story.
Yeah, in the apartment complex of his mind.
Yeah, and so you got to pay your rent. So, head on over patreon.com/Wildbow. I think that's the second week in a row I've made him Bristow in a metaphor, so I feel really bad about that. I'm going to stop trying to improv these.
Yeah. That's all we've got time for on this week's episode of Pale Reflections. But make sure you come back next week. We'll be talking about some more chapters of the same story.
See you then.
Bye.